This is Frida Liu. You're watching The Shift Asia. Nusanterra's purpose is to bring together the necessary partners and processes to deliver certified high-quality conservation projects for carbon-conscious investors seeking bankable solutions. The Nusanterra team combines diverse backgrounds from economics, consultancy, climate policy, and conservation to support organizations reach their conservation targets through nature-based climate solutions, or NCS. Now, NCS involves the protection and restoration of natural ecosystems, such as forests, peatlands, and mangroves, and have the potential to provide 1/3 of the emission reduction targets by 2030. So NCS are both cost-effective and provide significant additional benefits by supporting biodiversity and generating income for rural communities. Here to help us understand this a little bit more, me included, is Khairun Nisa Zabidi, CEO and co-founder of Nusanterra. Khairun, so nice to see you again. And I spewed a lot of things out there. I'm sure you can simplify it for me, but maybe what you do and the genesis of why you started Nusanterra.
Thanks, Frida, for having me on the show and giving us a platform to chat about our work. So very briefly, I've been working in climate change for a long time. I started off at the COPs. It's now COP 30.
Oh, wow.
I was at COP 14 many years ago.
Okay.
This was the time when climate wasn't as politicized as it is today. But very early on, recognized that there's an intergenerational issue around decisions that's made today and how it impacts our future and children and who will inherit the earth. So it really started off with intergenerational justice for me. And over time, my theory of change evolved. So I worked in the corporate sector, thinking like, if this is where decisions are made. I lobbied policy for some time. I set up my first venture in my mid-20s, looking at waste specifically, and then moving on to consulting climate, big organizations with PwC, where we looked at climate strategy, we looked at reporting standards. And eventually, I moved into the investment space. So I looked at international climate finance. I managed Malaysia's largest bilateral international climate finance investments here, and noticed a bit of a gap where, as over time, I think in the last 5-6 years, we're starting to see people sit up and take climate change seriously. Governments started making commitments, like net zero commitments, and we went from, I think at COP26, we went from 20 governments committing to net zero to 80. So that was a big shift of that. But even with those commitments, there's still the how of what we're going to be doing to meet our obligations and bend the emissions curve. So a lot of investments have been put into specifically looking at carbon emissions. We looked at languages we understand. So with carbon, what that means is two things, right? Emissions, and it could mean sinks.
Okay.
And so we understand that for us to mitigate emissions, it looks at shifting existing trajectories where we've built our entire economy on very heavy, carbon-heavy, fossil fuel reliant
here
industries.
In Malaysia,
well, globally, essentially, isn't it? And to shift that, there are two things we need to do. We either swap out bits of the system, like for example with the car, you swap out the engine of the car so that it becomes friendlier with EVs, for example, or you shift the system. Let's not drive anymore. Let's take the public transport or walk. So there's two ways we can swap that. But to achieve those goals, there's significant investments that's needed, which is why climate finance is such a key part of the climate negotiations. So we've committed about 100 billion a year for us to move to invest in so that we can make that shift.
Okay.
What makes it more complicated is when we participate in systems we don't fully, we haven't fully incorporated into the economy, and nature is a big part of that. So nature plays the other side of the climate conversation, mostly via sinks, because the existing forests in the world are the ones that are not just providing very important ecosystem services to us via carbon sinks, but it's also under threat from development, from competing priorities, economic growth, etc. So the world is now needing to do both. We need to mitigate, but we also need to protect our existing emissions.
Very interesting example you gave, about the car, the transportation. Do you change the engine or do you change your way of life completely, right? And I guess when you talk about climate solutions, and maybe you've touched upon this, but for people who don't understand, what are your conventional climate solutions?
Yes, so a lot of the current solutions that we're looking at is primarily in mitigation.
Okay.
So a lot of the conversation is happening around language we already understand. Let's swap out this technology with this technology, which is currently we're generating all of our emissions based on coal. Not in fashion anymore, let's switch to renewable energy. So a lot of the conversation is then shifting the investments away from coal power plants to saying, is there a greener way for us to do things? Similar with EVs.
Right.
Let's now move away from fossil fuel-based engines into more eco-friendly or climate-friendly engines, right? So then you develop technology, you develop financing solutions. Bank of Australia, lots of it's no longer financing fossil fuel-based cars.
Right.
The UK government is saying after 2025, no more fossil fuel-based cars on the road. We're not giving you taxes, road tax anymore.
Wow.
Things like that. So there are policy tools that you can actually deploy to create behavior shifts or create market shifts towards more eco-friendly solutions. Now that's the more conventional-based language because we understand. Now the not so conventional-based solutions are things like nature. And why do I say that? It's because it's not a commodity or not an asset that is generally recognized or priced in the economy. We expect when we emit, the forest provides its sink system for free.
Right.
So now there's an attempt to then incorporate that, what is called an externality from an economic point of view, so that we price that in the decisions we make. That's what makes it more complicated.
Okay, all right. Now, what is the current scenario with the voluntary carbon market? And alongside that, I will talk to you about the CCUS bill. But yeah, what's the current scenario with?
So very simply, what the carbon market attempts to do is to incorporate the cost of carbon into our decisions. So it's a polluters pay principle. If you emit, you pay. There are multiple different ways that government as a policy tool can roll out a carbon market. One way is through the cap and trade system. So the government says, okay, we're going to cap your emissions up to this point because that's the carbon budget. Beyond that, environment cannot sustain. Anything you emit beyond that, you have to trade or you pay a tax on top of it. So that's what the EU emissions trading scheme does in Europe. There are other systems like the voluntary carbon market system. So this one isn't a regulated system. It allows for firms that then say, okay, we have a net zero target and we can reduce our emissions up to a certain point. But beyond that, we would like to offset it somewhere else. But where do we purchase these credits for us to meet our internal goals? And that is where the voluntary carbon market comes in, where then producers of carbon credits will say, if we can demonstrate that by carrying out this intervention, it can produce X amount of carbon credits, then that's where organizations that want to purchase can essentially purchase it from a project developer that's developing these credits.
And is it succeeding? Is it moving at the pace we want? Is it the right way to go, in your opinion?
So it's a very new market. It's a market that's still, in theory, meant to provide one tool, where players are looking at, they're seeing it as a silver bullet. So that's where some of the problems come in. At what point are you allowed to buy carbon credits, for example? At what point should this be a solution? Does it even work? Can we even generate credits that are legitimate? So for Malaysia, which is very rich in forests, that's why it's such an interest to us, because we could essentially potentially be a huge generator of carbon credits.
You take a lot of that from in East Malaysia, right? All right, now, so Nusanterra Terra projects aim to provide significant additional benefits by supporting biodiversity and generating income for rural communities in the Malay Archipelago. How do you plan to do this?
So what we essentially do is not only do we provide advisory services, we assess where the market is in Malaysia at the moment. So where we are with interventions, developing solutions, for example, that are climate friendly towards generating carbon credits, what we're realizing is there's a gap at the moment in the regulation and administrative gap. So when you have players coming in saying, we'd like to buy carbon credits, where do you buy it from? So at the moment, the large swaths of forests are owned by the government. And the government are still in that stage of, how much assets do we actually have? So one of the things that Nusanterra does is that we help governments value ecosystem services, and carbon emissions is one of the many. One of the pieces we're working on currently is to help the federal government of Semenanjung, Malaysia, to look at setting up natural capital accounts for understanding what is the value of not just our natural capital assets, but our natural capital flows, such as carbon emissions. But it also includes things like flood regulation. It also looks at things like biodiversity. It also looks at things like mitigation for floods, etc. So there's quite a lot of indicators that's required for us to set up natural capital accounts. But once you have visibility of what these values are, it allows asset managers to then understand what are the trade-offs that you can make. For instance, if there was a plot of land and there's potential for minerals, rare earth minerals in that plot of land because the rise of EV and now our forests are under threat because of that. So it's not to say state governments shouldn't allow for mining of minerals. So that is a key income generator for the state. But it is to assess the viability, but also the trade-off. If there's a bat cave, for example, what is the value of that species? Or what is the value of bats, which is a pollinator for our durian trees? So not having that understanding of the value of the ecosystem makes it harder for government to then price the cost of leasing out this piece of land. Because at current, if it's, we lease it out for 100 years without valuing accurately compensations, the state government will be receiving it as it's a hole in the ground. So allowing for that economic trade-off allows
and to
for
fully understand it, right? And then
Correct.
I think, and I think there's something that hits the heart of most Malaysians when you say no more durian
Yes,
trees.
exactly.
That hurts. Right?
Yes, exactly.
That hurts on an emotional level.
Yes.
Okay. Now on your website it says that enabling the participation of nature investors. And before that though, what you're trying to do, have other countries done something similar?
Yes, absolutely. So we benchmark. So this piece of work is a feasibility study to see whether or not Malaysia is ready to move forward to set up our own accounts. We benchmarked several countries, including the UK, Australia. We looked at Indonesia. We looked at
Indonesia.
Yeah, that's right. So interestingly, the use cases for some of these countries, they set it up maybe 5-10 years ago at varying degrees of maturity. The UK, it's enabled the UK to introduce a Biodiversity Act. So what this act does is that it requires large developers to set a baseline for biodiversity for any big projects. And if, say, you discover a rare butterfly or butterfly, it then requires the developer to increase the value of biodiversity by up to 10%. And so, either increasing the habitat, moving it ex situ, lots of different ways. But that allows government to make decisions that take into account what would otherwise not be seen because it's not, we don't speak the same language, it's not the same indicator of monetary value. So it allows decision makers, and not just government, it allows investors, it allows potential project developers to fully understand what the impact of the project is on the ground and not just on ecosystems, also on people.
On your website, it says that enabling the participation of nature investors and private landowners, particularly from the commodities and farming industries, can be a powerful, albeit unexpected catalyst in our collective mission to achieve climate drawdown. Right. So, So you talked a little bit about the commodities. What about the farming industries? What are they currently doing?
So
or not?
A lot of our plantations are massive, either massive. Is run by massive conglomerates or smallholders, farming smallholders. And the way they're participating right now is through legacy. We spent a lot of, much of the 80s clearing out land so that we can participate in the global commodities market. This is through our rubber industry and our palm oil industry, right? So we're very good at, let's clear this piece of land, let's give financing support to smallholders, and we'll buy back as off-takers so that we can build, aggregate all of the crude palm oil and sell it as part of our massive commodity sector, right? So one of the challenges with that is food security, essentially. When we clear large amounts of land or forests so that we focus on a monocrop, there's all sorts of issues related to not just food, but also within, if we're looking at the peninsula alone, we fragmented the forests in the central forest pine. And so you hear about all these, tigers. Recently for Mother's Day, we saw an elephant mother grieving for baby being hit. That is the cost of highways, plantations that's fragmented that forest, and there aren't any, the quality of forests is now affected because of these decisions that we've made in the 80s. So there's a document called the Central Forest Pine Master Plan that attempts to reconnect what's been fragmented so that we can recover and rehabilitate and rejuvenate the Central Forest Pine. It's a very important document, but the financing of how we will actually be reclaiming the land. Are we then, providing compensation? Do we have priorities in terms of, roadkill? It costs billions to raise highways, for example, to allow for wildlife crossings. So that part and the implementation of the Central Forest Pine project hasn't entirely been looked at. So the opportunities are there,
Right.
and the opportunities to engage with current landowners to reclaim that land or compensate them,
Wow.
move them, is there.
Right, because everybody, and how do we get to that common ground, right?
Exactly.
Because everybody will always be looking at it from their perspective.
That's right. Yeah.
And I guess, one of the things I guess I have to ask as well, how are you working with the powers that be at the moment? And I know also that the CCUS bill that's just been introduced, right? How will that change? Will it change? What's your take on this?
Yeah. So, a couple of years ago, there was a big call for more regulation. It's very unheard of. Most places are like, we don't want regulation, right? But I think the corporates really want a direction of travel to say, government, please send us a signal as to where the direction of travel is. So I think just in the last year alone, there was development of huge numbers of policies, which was welcome, but they all interlink with each other.
Right.
So the climate change bill, for instance, is now in development, hasn't been tabled in Parliament yet, but the CCUS bill has come first.
Right.
And this is because, again, it speaks a language that the powers that be understands, because, and unfortunately, it's still a very new technology, which has big question marks around its technological feasibility, but even commercial return.
Right.
What it does is that it allows for the capture of carbon at point of source, and before it's emitted, you store it underground. So that, in theory, is what it's meant to do. So what we would hope the government to provide some steering with is, first of all, where does that sit in our big climate story? Is that going to extend the life cycle or the lifespan of fossil fuels, which we should be looking to sunset? We're sunsetting coal, and fossil fuels are coming next. So the introduction of the bill then tells us, well, essentially it's just a piece of document that says these are the rules if technology comes in, if firms come in, or if that's rollout investments are here. But there should be some kind of moral guidance around, is this a direction of travel that Malaysia wants to include as part of our climate trajectory, as part of our climate plans? Should this be, should we be looking at focusing on other types of investments as opposed to the, a piece of technology that isn't fully realized yet?
Right.
Or should we be looking at financing nature? Should we be looking at a solution that we know works, that we know is critical to places like Malaysia? I cited the UK's Biodiversity Act. We don't have a Biodiversity Act in Malaysia as a mega diverse country.
Right.
So there isn't a direction of travel to say, this is how important nature is to us.
Right. So the UK has a Biodiversity Act, and here in Malaysia we don't have one.
We have a CCUS Act in development.
So and I guess in the work that you're doing right now, what some of the roadblocks or challenges? Is it awareness, and is it just awareness and understanding? I think for me, I'm still learning this as well, right? And I'm aware. I don't think I fully comprehend it. Am I your typical customer?
Yes, I think all of us are part of the story, isn't it? I think all of us are learning. I'd say awareness is a simple way to say it.
Right.
But what it is disconnect.
Okay.
It's disconnect that we have not just with ourselves, but with nature, with each other. So a lot of our issues is because, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
Tiger in the forest, a tree falls, it's not something that affects me.
If I didn't hear it.
Yeah, then it's not my problem. When we throw something away, I don't know where it goes. When you ask kids where the electricity comes from, they say it comes from the switch.
Yeah.
So it's a disconnect. A lack of awareness is patronizing to say, isn't it? To say that, just because I don't know, right?
Right.
But if we ask ourselves, like, where does it go? Where does electricity come from? Then that starts to create am I making the right choice? Am I doing this in a way that can ensure that future generations are protected? And everybody can do this, from a policymaker. So a lot of my work is to actually help people connect with what they do. So often I ask people in my workshops, and a lot of it is government, is to take their hats off and say, why does nature mean to you? What does nature mean to you? But more importantly is to help them understand that what you do today will define how much or how little Malaysians suffer tomorrow. So when you see it that way, you're like, wow, actually, there's quite a lot I can do. And you can say the same thing to bankers. You can say the same thing to journalists. You can say the same thing to policymakers, to manufacturers, to architects. Everyone has that. Who am I in the world, right? How am I showing up? How am I allowing myself and as a human being to be regenerative instead of extractive?
Okay. So in the work that you do, who are your typical clients? Yeah.
At the moment, so because I work in nature financing, it is anybody who looks at investments in nature, who looks at overseeing nature as assets. It's anyone who'd be looking to purchase, make decisions related to purchasing or engaging with nature-related credits. I'd be looking at investors, bankers, financiers. That would be my main sort of audience.
Right.
Currently, a big part of we work for is government.
Okay.
Mostly to help them build systems and infrastructure so that they and asset managers, nature managers can engage and manage those assets better.
Okay. Is there anything else you want to bring up that I have not asked you that you think would be relevant for the audience?
I think there's quite a lot of room for us to build in how nature is viewed at the moment. So the language of finance is essentially trying to bake in nature as a part of the conversation.
Right.
But what we would hope to do is it's essentially a bridge,
Right.
because we are part of nature.
Right.
Currently, we don't. We've othered it, right? Like it's not part of our conversation. The finance bit extends and allows for that conversation, for them to be included as part of that conversation. But eventually, we want to be able to see ourselves as a system.
Right.
And that is the bridge that we hope to get at. So it's the bigger picture around how finance is essentially just a language to allow for that participation of that conversation.
And I like your example of how whether it's a banker or whoever, when you understand your connection to nature and what it means, right? So I always I relate to this because I go for my walk in the park, right? Literally, and I appreciate it. And maybe if you spend more time in the park instead of the shopping mall, you'd appreciate it a little bit more how important it is.
Yeah,
thanks so much for spending time and helping me comprehend this a little better.
Thank you for having me.
And so you've been watching The Shift Asia.